Okay, so today we're going to take a look at capturing motion with the Action 5 Pro. We're going to use my bike to capture the motion with the Action 5 Pro, like you would do in an action video. So hopefully this video is going to help you understand how the Action 5 Pro works when capturing shots with a lot of motion in them. We're going to use two different mounts on my bike, one here on the handlebars and another here on the rear of the bike, so we can get different perspectives of the motion. I'm also going to run this in full auto, and then we're going to introduce some ND filters so we can bring down the amount of light coming in, to then reduce our shutter speed and see what effect that has on the Action 5 Pro itself, and hopefully bust a few of the myths that surround ND filters and their usage. Now, I am going to run all of this in Rocksteady Plus to give us better stabilization. But when we talk about stabilization as well, towards the end of this video, I will also talk about the mount that I have here on the front of the bike, because that is quite important when it comes to stabilization. So let's get on and have a look first at a auto setting on the Action 5 Pro. So it's controlling the shutter speed, it's controlling the ISO, and see how the motion from the camera looks. Looking at the footage captured in auto mode, it's a fraction overexposed, nothing drastic, could be adjusted in post, so it's usable. But my main concern here is the fact that the shutter speed is being pushed so high. Now what happens is when we have the shutter speed so high, it basically freezes all of the motion in the image. So you're going to end up with it looking slightly unnatural with the motion, because it's frozen in every frame. And we'll talk about this once you finish looking at this sequence. We'll go into this in a little bit more detail. Okay, so now looking at this frame by frame, what you'll see is there isn't much in the way of motion captured in each frame. This is because the shutter speed at the moment is high in the auto mode. So what we'll do now is we'll have a look at how we can make the motion look more realistic by bringing that shutter speed down. Let's have a look at how I choose the correct ND filter for the environment I'm filming in. I'll do this by using the Mimo app. I'll then turn on the overexposure warning so that I can see the overexposure, and apply maybe an ND8 to start with if it isn't a particularly bright day, and see how that reacts with the exposure warnings. If I'm unhappy with the results, I'll then take that one off, swap it out for another ND filter, say an ND16, and I'll do this until I'm happy with the exposure coming down enough to film. And then I may just flick the ISO out of auto and just flick it up and down just to see the point where it starts to overexpose. Let's now move on and have a look at what it looks like if we now put an ND filter on and still run in auto mode on the Action 5 Pro. Looking at the footage now with the ND filter attached and the camera still in auto mode, what you'll see is that we have brought down the shutter speed. So we are going to get motion captured in the frames, but we also now push the ISO up, probably to a level where we wouldn't want it because we're going to introduce noise. The EIS, the electronic image stabilization, is not affected at all by the ND filter. That doesn't interfere with the EIS. What does interfere with the EIS to some degree may be the fact that we're baking now that motion into each image, so there's nothing that can be done about that. Even though we'll still stabilize the image as in camera movement, but it can't correct anything we've baked into the image. At the end of this sequence, we'll have a look at this frame by frame. Looking at this frame by frame, you'll see that we've introduced more motion into each frame by bringing the shutter speed to a slower level. But we have now introduced noise with the raised ISO, so you'll see a lot more noise in the image. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to set my camera to 1/60th of a second for the shutter speed, because I film at 4K 30 frames per second. And we'll have the ND filter on and see what effect this now has on the footage. Looking at the footage, you can now see that we have a much better perception of motion within the sequence in the video. But what you may also notice is it may look a little bit more unstable because we are actually baking in that motion into every frame. So nothing can take that out of the frame. All the EIS is doing is stabilizing the camera by making sure that the actual video sequence is level. There's nothing more it can do once that motion is baked into the frame. Like I say, this isn't to do with the ND filter. This is purely down to the shutter speed we're now running this at. So let's run to the end of this sequence and then we'll have a quick look frame by frame. Looking at the frame by frame, you'll now see there is a lot more motion captured in each frame. This will give you the perception of better motion when watching it as a video sequence. Now, just to demonstrate further, I've taken a sequence of images here, just still frames, captured with my camera. One at 1/4000th of a second, to show you what an image looks like and freezes the motion with a fast shutter speed. The next one is at 1/500th of a second, again slowing it down slightly, a bit like we did with the Action 5 Pro. So this shows you what the motion will look like. And again now, we will look at this at 1/60th of a second, and you'll see the amount of motion this brings in. And these were just still images done with my camera with no ND filters, just to emphasize on how the shutter speed changes that perception of motion. Just coming back to what I also said at the beginning about the stability depending on the type of mount you use on the handlebars of a bike. Now, this is the mount I originally tried, and you notice it has quite a distance between where it mounts on the handlebars and where the camera mounts. What will happen is if you use this type of mount without any type of dampening, that this mount is going to vibrate any of the movement on the handlebars, the flexing on the handlebars, all the way up this column and exaggerate it at the camera. So you're going to end up with footage like this. So this footage is going to be completely unusable. And that's why I chose the mount that I used earlier in the video, because it mounts directly on the handlebars and you can then screw the magnetic mount for the Action 5 Pro into that mount, and there is no vibration then transmitted between the handlebars and the camera, or it's not an exaggerated transmission of the vibration. So you end up with a more stable image. Hopefully I've answered all your questions today on capturing motion with the Action 5 Pro. If I haven't, please drop me a question in the comments and I will answer it as soon as I can. Thank you very much for watching today, and I'll see you again soon in another video.